people who have witnessed someone object during a wedding, what went down? The groom's dad interrupted the wedding to ask the bride's father whether or not she was truly a virgin. Then he went on about how he did not know anything about the wedding and blah blah blah. Truly weird and embarrassing. I was there with my now ex-boyfriend. When the groom's father interrupted the wedding, the bride's father, officiating the wedding, did in fact say it was confirmed. I have no clue how or what. They seemed to be super conservative and wore sleeved dresses, long hair, etc., and were African American. They eventually showed the father-in-law out and continued with the ceremony, which was super awkward afterwards. It was literally as if I was on prank. Said ex seemed to find the ordeal entertaining because she was humiliated. This was his family bride. And that sort of sealed the deal that something was wrong with the guy. We broke up a week later. Story 2, the groom himself. I was a wedding planner with a local company, and that meant attending receptions to make sure everything ran smoothly. Prior to the ceremony, the grandfather asked me which room the groom was in so he could have a chat with him. I walked him to the room, and he gave the groom plane tickets and a hotel reservation completely paid for to Greece. The parents had told the bride and groom not to make plans after the wedding for 2 weeks, as it's customary in their family for grandparents to gift the honeymoon. The groom started crying and thanked the grandparents. Groom puts the stuff in his coat pocket to thank the grandparents during the reception and surprise the bride. Ceremony over, everyone smiles. Cocktail hour ends, everyone sits down to dinner, and they do the introductions. The entire bridal party is now seated. Best man, groom's brother makes a speech. Sister of the bride, matron of honor, makes a speech. Groom makes a speech to his bride. I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you to our family, the generous support, and to Grandma and Grandpa for giving us a once-in-a-lifetime trip to Greece. Cue bride crying, applause. But, he continues, I won't be taking this trip. Throws down everything from his pocket. My brother and wife should be taking this trip seeing as she's been banging him for the last 6 months, and just walks out. Story 3. I was a groomsman at a wedding 2 years ago. The bride and groom had been together for right around 4 years. They decided to write their own vows. The groom went through his, they were sweet as hell. He is a great dude. The wife decided that during the vows, it is the appropriate time to let him and everyone else know that he would soon be a father. Everyone was crying, hugging. It was a pretty cool moment, especially being from the Midwest/Bible Belt, where that kind of thing normally gets frowned upon. Everything was going great up until a point in the reception where the bride was talking to a friend of hers, telling her how excited she was to be having a girl. Somehow, no one caught this except the groom, who got up, threw his drink at the wall and shattered it, called his new wife a stupid slut and told her she was a cheating whore and stormed out. The bride started crying and swore she would never cheat on him, and couldn't believe he was ruining their special day. The other groomsmen and I ran outside to see what was up with him, and then it hit all of us at the same time. She was 16 weeks pregnant, and he had only been coming from Afghanistan for 8 weeks. She didn't think that anyone would catch that and was somehow going to try and convince her husband they were having the baby early. I have not heard much from him or her since the wedding, but it was heavily rumored that the pregnancy was a result of a one-night stand with one of my buddy's cousins. Story 4. The groom just stood up there and started crying and, in front of everyone, told the bride that he had fallen out of love with her a while before, but he did not know how to break it off. It was extremely uncomfortable. They both stepped out and 10 minutes later came back out and got married, because she had apparently told him she was pregnant. They are still together, with 3 kids, and I am not sure about the husband, but I can confirm that the wife is having an affair. Neither of them is happy, but she has a comfortable life, and he does not have the spine to leave. Story 5. This happened very recently, but in a different manner than the other comments I am seeing. For years, groom and best man are super close, room together, and the running joke is that they are more than friends. Later, groom meets bride, falls in love, and proposes. New running joke is that best man is very disappointed that groom is marrying someone else. At the wedding, officiant asks if anyone has objections. Best man objects. Officiant quickly overrules the objection. It was planned, and bride thought it was a funny way to acknowledge the super close friendship between groom and best man. It did not result in anyone being kicked out or awkwardness. Fun and surprisingly appropriate. Story 6. Only once, but it was non-romantic. The father of the bride had been absentee after her parents' divorce. He had remarried and gotten into the Christian Science religion, and they were both terrible. The new wife was not invited to my friend's wedding, but the father came, and it seemed like he was there to be supportive. He stood up during vows and proclaimed my friend was a bitch just like her mother, And the groom should get out while he can because my friend was a soul-leeching succubus. Not the worst wedding I ever went to. Story 7. Went to a co-worker's wedding and the maid of honor objected and admitted to being the other woman and that the groom had been cheating with her for months. The bride left in tears and the groom immediately tried to get with the maid of honor, but she told him she was not going to hurt the bride further and that he needs to F off. The bride is doing much better and is now a manager here, and I have not heard from the groom in over a year. The Moh and bride are on speaking terms, but I do not think their relationship is going to ever be what it used to be. Story 8. I saw it had nearly happened at my uncle's wedding. A friend of theirs got too drunk, and when they said, "Speak now," he smiled and started to stand up. My mother grabbed him by his hair and sat him back down by force. It was my mother, the groom's sister. The drunk was a close friend of both the bride and groom, so he was seated up front. He is a nice dude, but sometimes a bit of a dumb A. It was a small, non-traditional wedding. They were wed in the botanical gardens by justice of peace. The reception was held in the same place. When you entered the area for the reception, there was an open bar, so some people helped themselves before the ceremony started. And one overindulged a bit. Story 9. When I was 13, we went to my second cousin's wedding. Everything was going great. They even got past the "speak now or forever hold your peace" part. They wrote their own vows. But before my second cousin's fiancée could even begin her vows, his son got up and announced to the entire room that she was cheating on his dad with her drug dealer, and he could not let his dad marry her. My second cousin yelled at his son to either sit down or leave. The son left. My second cousin married her anyway, and 5 years later he found out it was true and they separated but were too tweaked out to afford a divorce. Finally, he got married a third time, but before he could get married, his third now ex-wife had to pay for their divorce. This wedding had no objections. They moved to Missouri, and this time, instead of separating or asking for a divorce, he decided he did not want to be married anymore and just moved back to Cali to get back together with his second ex-wife. Yep, family dinners are a little awkward. Story 10. That wowso. About 5 years ago, a coworker of mine invited all of us to his wedding. He was a great guy, but none of us had ever met his wife. We saw pictures of her, and he always said nothing but good things about her. Looking forward to the wedding. It was an incredibly nice one. It looked like they paid quite a bit for it. Everything was going smoothly, and I was having fun, and I assumed so was everyone else. Anyway, now they were both at the altar, looking deeply into each other's eyes and smiling, and when that line came of, "Speak now or forever hold your peace," I got anxious, but nothing ever happened. So right as soon as the anxiousness faded away, the bride's mother stood up and objected. She blurted some stuff about how she did not want to continue their family with a man like him. He was black, she was white. The bride-to-be cried and ran off. The wedding went silent. The bride's dad took the mom and ran after the bride. The groom stood there incredibly awkwardly. He may or may not have achieved leaving his body. Anyway, the groomsmen took him away. I left because it was too weird. Apparently, the reception went on. They did not get married that day, but ended up together anyway privately, and surprisingly, work was not weird. He laughed about it. They are happily married. Edit, just so I do not have to individually reply to everyone's comments and questions. The mother-in-law never truly stated it was because he was black, but this guy was incredibly nice, selfless, and someone you completely felt comfortable around. He never judged anyone and was well-spoken. The mother-in-law also never showed signs of hating him. Who knows why it happened? Maybe the bride and groom found out. I am not sure. I have since moved and have not spoken to them. But man, that memory lasts. Story 11. The best man at my stepsister's wedding did this. It happened at the rehearsal the night before. It was a very large wedding, and the rehearsal was bigger than a lot of weddings. The minister was going over the vows quickly while giving instructions on what to do. When he said something about objections, the best man interrupted, saying he had to put a stop to this. He was in love with the bride and was sure she felt the same way. My sister and everyone else were horrified. It caused plenty of chaos and confusion. As far as I know, after that, neither the bride nor groom ever spoke to him again. Story 12. I was working at a wedding when I was younger. I was running the bar at the reception, which was very close to the hall where the weddings were held. We were told the reception would begin around 4 p.m. It was already about 3, and I was packing fridges doing the usual barman things, while one of the male guests was still sitting there drinking. I asked if he was not joining the reception, to which he replied something along the lines of, "When I have the courage." He downs his drink and leaves. 10 minutes later, he is back, looking extremely disappointed. The guy orders a drink, and less than 30 seconds later, another guy who was dressed extremely well, turned out to be the groom, walks in, punches him in the back of the head, and leaves. This dude just picked his drink up and sipped it further. I eventually found out that this dude had downed his drink, walked into the reception and admitted to sleeping with the wife on her hen night and again the night before the wedding. He was never invited to the wedding, he just felt the groom needed to know. So he found out where the wedding was, suited up and dropped the info mid-ceremony. Story 13. At my own wedding. But not in the traditional way. We were getting married along a river at the end of summer, and tons of wakeboarders and boats were out. I was a ball of nerves, and the ceremony felt so serious, when suddenly, some dude bro on a boat blasting music screamed, "Don't do it, bro!" and sped off. It was hilarious and made the rest of the ceremony a lot more fun. My husband and I cracked up, even though his brothers looked like they were about to jump in the river after the guy. Story 14. No objections were made, unfortunately. But back when I worked in a hotel a few years ago, I got to witness a very interesting wedding. In preparation, we had to ensure we had ordered enough blue WKD, as this was the groom's drink of choice. First red flag. The whole wedding took place in the hotel. The function room also hosted the ceremony, so we started early that day. Before the ceremony, the bride had taken 3 bottles of Prosecco up to her room while she was getting ready and was clearly tipsy before the wedding started, but seemed to act sober enough that whoever was conducting the ceremony was none the wiser. The ceremony seemed normal, but I was prepping the bar, so I would not have known either way. As it ended, all the guests flooded out for drinks while we changed the function room and set out the tables for the sit-down meal. The guests were rough as a badger's arse, to put it politely. I already knew one of them, as he had been to the hotel before, acting like a total wanker when I told him the bar was closed and I would not be serving him. However, he was being especially polite to me this time, as it was clear his date for the wedding was definitely not the same girl he was in with just a few weeks ago, who I suspect was a paid acquaintance. Before the meal even began, we were starting to worry if we would have enough alcohol. These people drank like fish, but we managed to get them all seated and fed, and everyone was friendly and well-behaved. As the night went on, the bride was slowly becoming so drunk she could barely stand and had changed from her wedding dress into a very scant pink negligee with a tutu skirt. She had also given up on using the bathroom, so she loudly announced she would be relying solely upon nature wheeze from this point onwards. Before midnight, we were nearly totally out of spirits. The guests were ordering shots every round. I had tried to deny service, but my manager was having none of it, and as the hotel was struggling, they wanted to make as much money as possible and had shotted us out of almost everything. Blue WKDs were long gone, but the groom had a lovely blue smile at this point. After the bride finally gave up trying to shoot disgusting liquor that had likely been there since the hotel was built, they headed to the dance floor. The party started winding down, and it was time for the last dance. But the bride decided she would prefer to have this with a male wedding guest, which really upset the groom. She then loudly announced she would be throwing an after-party in their suite, and everyone was invited into the hot tub. Funnily enough, the groom was not thrilled and kicked off. Another member of staff managed to calm everyone down and convinced the DJ to play the last dance song once more before he left, and the groom agreed. Everyone started packing up, and the bride came back from her room in her 3rd outfit of the night. A nice gray stained tracksuit. She was adamant she wanted another cigarette before bed. God knows how many packs she went through that day. Especially sad considering the money for the wedding came from her parents' inheritance, who both died of cancer. She could not find a lighter and became irate, screaming at the groom for one. The groom claimed he did not have one, but not taking no for an answer, she rifled through his pockets and found one. Holding it aloft, she screamed at him that he was a liar and slapped him clean across the face. The groom, obviously not enjoying this, returned the favor and punched her in the face. The best man spotted this, leaped across a sofa, and tackled the groom to the floor. They were now having a full-on fist fight while the bride sobbed incoherently. I tried to get out of the way as I was being trampled by Mr. WKD and his scummy friend. My supervisor stormed in, saying he found coke in the bathroom and the police were on their way. The best man ran off like a robber's dog, and the groom stood there stunned and then followed his new wife into the function room. We then heard screaming and shouting from that room, and the bride had picked up a chair and launched it at her husband and was now holding a second one, trying to attack him with it. At this point, it was about 2 a.m., and I was royally done with the day. My mom was waiting for me outside, so I grabbed my bag and headed off, giving my supervisor strict instructions to tell me exactly how this ended when I was back for my next shift. I passed a riot van of police officers on the way out the door, directed them to the drama, and went home. Next shift, I was informed that an ambulance arrived shortly after the police. The groom was taken to the hospital after sustaining a head injury, but he did a runner from the paramedics when he got there. The bride stayed at the hotel and, to console herself, spent the night with the male wedding guest she danced with. They left together in the morning, and a week later announced on Facebook she was in a new relationship with him. Bride and groom were absolutely hammered and got into a fist fight. The best man joined in but fled before the police arrived. Bride spent the night with a wedding guest in the honeymoon suite while her new husband was transported to the hospital. A few quick clarifications. 1. For those unfamiliar, a nature wee means to urinate outside and is sometimes known as a wild wee. Do with that information what you will. 2. Not an Irish wedding, but I have a lot of Irish family, so I can understand why that assumption may have been made. 3. Thank you for the shiny coins and kind comments about my word choice. I am glad it helped set the scene. Story 15. I was best man at a wedding, and the groom's older sister decided to play a joke and stood up and said, "I object," then started giggling. The groom's mother stood up, slapped her, told her it was not an appropriate joke, and told her to go home. This mother still refuses to talk to her daughter 4 years later. Edit, for those of you asking, it was not the first time this daughter had done something to piss this mom off. And this was the first time I had ever seen this mom hit any of her kids. I have known the family for 15 years. I also found out later that the mom had spent over $50,000 on this wedding. Story 16. I was at an Orthodox Jewish wedding with a shupa ceremony where they read a contract and recite 7 blessings. The groom's dad pinched his son's derriere at a most solemn moment, causing him to loudly shriek into the silent audience of 400. The bride saw and snorted loudly. They also publicly kissed after the ceremony, which was a huge scandal. Edit, bride and groom kissed. Populace could speak of nothing else for months. Edit 2. No, it's not against Jewish law. It's the community's sensibility. They just do not do PDA. Edit 3. It wasn't an objection, but it sure sounded like one during the reading of the contract. Story 17. Not speak now part, but well, you'll see. A friend of mine was getting married in the park under the trees because both were nature people, and the groom had a dog that went everywhere with him that wasn't allowed in any church. There were some rows of chairs with lots of people filling them, including the groom's mother, who was sitting with his dog. Bride and groom were at the front with the officiant. Officiant begins. Officiant comes to the part where he says, "Do you take groom's dog?" Shadow began to howl a loud, long, mournful howl. Everyone laughed. Officiant started the question again. Loud, long, mournful howl. Again. Everyone laughed. Groom told Shadow to come to the front. Shadow ran up, stood directly in between the bride and groom, and the officiant started again. Not a peep from Shadow. Her vows. His vows. Officiant looked at Shadow and asked, "Shadow, do you take bride and groom to be your lawfully wedded parents?" Shadow barked one single bark. Officiant concluded the ceremony. Everyone cheered and clapped, and Shadow barked 3 times, the only times that he made any sounds. Not kidding. Beautiful dog too. Story 18. I used to be an audio engineer. At this one smaller chapel, I was running sound for a wedding, and the officiant got to that station at the ceremony. A woman stood up and said something. My station was recessed into the wall, and I couldn't quite hear her. She spoke for 5 or 6 seconds, and the room had a few upset/shocked sounds. Another woman on the side of the room near me just spoke up, saying, "Don't you listen to nothing she has to say? You two go ahead and get married." The room laughed, and the ceremony persisted. Story 19. I attended a wedding as a guest of a family member, and when the pastor said that, the doors busted open to the sanctuary, and a man appeared and started to say, "I do." But 2 huge ushers, one of whom was my date, quickly grabbed the guy before he could say anything but, under the arms and literally lifted him up off the floor and carried him out. The wedding continued as normal. Turned out the guy was the ex of the bride. Strangest sight I ever saw. Story 20. I once went to a wedding where both families were Irish. My girlfriend knew them, but I didn't. At the ceremony, the groom's ex-wife started shouting stuff and was gently directed outside. I couldn't hear what was said. The reception was amazing. Nice venue, but a bunch of guests had brought their own instruments and just started jamming what I can only describe as a genuine Irish jig. This went on for hours and remains a lasting memory of oral beauty. But I digress. There was a lot of booze, there was no responsible serving of alcohol, and I'm certain it was by design. At some point, I used the men's room and was curious if I'd just seen the groom in a stall, door open, with someone who was not the bride. I didn't know these people, so I said nothing. Sometime later, my girlfriend states seriously, "We should get going now." Yeah, sure. We grab our stuff and head downstairs. I see the suspicious fellow again in the stairwell, going to the absolute town on this same lady. My girlfriend grabs my arm tightly and keeps walking past, mumbles a thank you for the invite. I just smile and follow because it's all weird. Yep, that was the groom. octopus sing his ex-wife at his own wedding to another woman? The bride genuinely seemed a gem. The look that woman gave us as we passed was this smugly dominant, I always get what I want, heck yeah, drunk as hell glare. Wow. They had some reasonable bubbly in a tub for people to take home, and who would know or care if we harked a few extras? I got it all explained to me after we were in a cab and well on our way home. I never got a follow-up to that story, but 10 out of 10 on the music. Would tag along to an Irish wedding again. Story 21. This was in the early 70s in semi-rural Washington state. My cousin was getting married, and my aunt and the mother of the groom did not get along well. During the ceremony, when the pastor got to the part about objecting, my aunt said something to my uncle, and the groom's mom jumped up and grabbed my aunt, and they started going at it all the way out the door and into the parking area. They were separated, and everyone filed back into the barn, where the wedding continued. The best part, though, was when another one of my cousins simply walked into the woods after the wedding, because that's where he lived. Story 22. Not at a wedding, but at a funeral. A young man, mid-20s, had passed away rather suddenly in some sort of accident. His wife of a year or so, and their respective families and friends were all in attendance as they were getting ready to lower him into the ground. The pastor asked if anyone would like to say anything further, and another woman in her early 30s stood up. She began to tell everyone in attendance about how much pain she was in over the loss of the love of her life, and that the two of them were meant/going to be together, and now they couldn't. Yup, the poor wife had to find out about the cheating at the funeral. Story 23. This might not count, but it was like 12 hours before the wedding. One of my ex's best friends had a destination wedding in Mexico. Both parties stayed in a huge mansion house overlooking the water. I wasn't at the wedding party, but I was in a hotel close by. The night before the wedding, the bridesmaids and groomsmen stayed up late partying. Everyone passed out, but at midnight or so, the bride's mom woke up because she heard the living room speakers, since they had been playing music. She happened to hear noise coming from outside and went out there, and the maid of honor was in the hot tub doing it with the groom. The maid of honor had been raised by the bride's mom, basically like a second mom, so she was shocked, to say the least. They had just bought a house too. The wedding never happened, and I enjoyed my vacation and returned the dress. Edit, super after the fact. But I did some research, and last year they made up, got married, and had a kid. I feel bad for the girl for not just kicking him aside. Story 24. Got booted out of my cousin's wedding reception with about 20 other people. My cousin had her wedding on a farm with a massive pig roast. From what I remember, there was a massive amount of people. Anyway, her father and my other older cousin never really got along. At one point during the reception, my older cousin had enough and absolutely lost it. He looked at a handful of us and asked if we had his back. Of course, we all nodded, not really knowing what was about to happen. He disappeared and a few minutes later came back with a 20-pound bag of pork meat from the leftover roast. He walked down to where my cousin's dad was. My aunt proceeds to yell, "Lonnie, no!" and smacked him right in the side of the face with the bag of meat. An all-out family brawl ensued. The whole family hasn't been invited to a wedding ever since. Story 25. My dad insisted on having this in his and my mom's wedding because he wanted it to mean speak now or forever hold your peace, meaning my mom was his piece of ass. Almost 40 years later, they're still married. Side note, when he walked me down the aisle at my first wedding, he let me know I could still say no even 2 steps from Pachelbel's Canon in D. I said nope and giggled. Silly me, we were divorced 6 years later. Story 26. It almost happened at a wedding we were supposed to be going to. They had heard about each other's religious beliefs a few days before. My uncle, bride's father, said better off because he would have stopped the wedding if it had gone on. On a positive note, my bride's nephew and I had the coolest birthday party. The bride's mother had everything switched from a wedding reception to a birthday party. Story 27. My boyfriend was friends with a guy who was getting a quickie marriage and needed witnesses. We agreed and went inside the little reception room where the preacher, bride, and the groom were lined up, waiting on us. The preacher started his thing, and I noticed a woman come in and lean against the back wall. She looked pissed, standing with her arms crossed. Preacher, is there anyone here today who objects to the union of F***ing? Please speak now? The couple looked back at us, and we both smiled. Suddenly, the bride's attention turned to the woman in the back of the room. "What the F is she doing here?" she said. The woman quickly raises her hand, looking at the old preacher. "I object. I don't agree with this marriage." The bride glares at her. "Shut up, bish. Wait your friggin' turn. It's my scheduled day. You're just mad you didn't think of it first." The woman had to be dragged out of the room, kicking and screaming and spitting at the bride. After the reception, my boyfriend's friend explained that he was originally in a relationship with the bride. After 10 years together, he started sleeping with her sister, the woman. They were close sisters until both ladies got pregnant by him simultaneously. They fought each other like cats and dogs for the next several years, until the two cousins became school-aged and best friends. Neither one of the sisters would give up the man, and he wasn't sure which one he loved more, so he kept seeing both women. Last I heard, they were all still together, but the two sisters had teamed up to take down his pregnant mistress. Story 28. I've never been to a wedding where this was asked. I had a friend who was going to say something because our friend, the groom, was still in love with his ex and only proposed to the new girl because she hinted that she'd leave him like the ex did, but the minister never asked, and we all told the friend not to object. I don't know if he would have. The bride and groom are still married as far as I know. Story 29. I'm a pastor and I officiated a wedding once where the groom had a little too much to drink before the ceremony. Not a huge deal to me, but his sister, who was a bridesmaid, found out. She got pissed, and as I was walking down a hallway after using the restroom, I overheard her talking to him. She said something along the lines of, "If you have one more beer, I'm telling the bride what you did last night." I was unsure what to do. I felt like it wasn't my place to intervene, so I didn't say anything. The wedding went fine, and they are still married. I'm still curious as to what he did. Story 30. Well, when I was in college, I was friends with a girl who danced on stage, and people threw money at her. Often she had a distinct lack of clothing on. Well, she married a preacher's son, and I was invited, but I got lost on the way and missed the wedding. The reception, though, had an open bar, and I ended up making out with the drunken bride on the dance floor in front of everyone. Her mom ended up prying us apart, and I decided from the look on the groom's face that it was time to hightail it out of there. Not exactly what OP was looking for, but in the same ballpark, so I shared. Story 31. I went to a cousin's wedding once, and the groom's mother didn't have to verbally object. It was written all over her face the entire time, including as she walked down the aisle to be seated, and throughout the reception. We still talk about it. Almost 10 years later, she still hasn't forgiven him for marrying my cousin, and we still don't know why. They don't speak. Unrelated, but my stepsister knocked my mom out at my brother's wedding rehearsal dinner. Totally normal kind of event at the time in our family. FYI for those who think differently, money most does not buy, class. It was a $30,000 wedding. Story 32. Went to a cousin's wedding a couple of years ago. They had a nice wedding outdoors at a country club. They had a dog, Shiloh, who was a Chesapeake/Retriever mix. He was a ring boy. When the pastor got to the part of objections, the dog turned around suddenly because there were ducks in the fountain area and let out a long howl and barks. Everyone laughed, and the groom remarked, "Shiloh, I love you too, boy. You'll get ducks soon." They moved the dog out of the area to finish the wedding, but that dog was a highlight of the wedding. He passed away last year due to a large tumor in his stomach. He lived to be 13. Note, yes, Shiloh did get duck at the end along with some love and attention from every attendant there. The cousin treated Shiloh like her own kid. Had him since she was 14. Story 33. I'm not sure if it counts, but when my mother married my now stepfather, it was originally supposed to be an outdoor wedding near the edge of a lake. But on the day of, the weather turned bad, so they switched it at the last minute to a church about 100 feet away from the original spot. No big deal. I'm pretty sure this place was built exclusively for weddings because it had a church and reception hall, along with about 20 small buildings, each with 2 to 3 rooms, except one that was one room. Anyways, both of my mother's parents were dead, so I'm the one that got to give her away. I was around 11 or 12 at this time. I also had to give away my stepfather for reasons I'll add after this. I give them away, the ceremony is coming to an end, and the minister asks if anyone has any objections. It's quiet for a couple of seconds, then booms huge crack of thunder. It's over a decade later and we still joke about it. A few extra things that happens. My now stepbrother refused to go because he hated my mom. 3 weeks before the wedding, my stepdad's parents said my mom had been sleeping with his brother. We hadn't seen them in years. 2 weeks before the wedding, my stepdad's parents left a message on the answering machine about how my mother was a terrible daughter for getting married 3 months after her mother died. My grandma had been telling them they should get married for 4 to 5 years already at that point. And this was the final straw where everyone was uninvited. All in all, though, it was a relatively fun wedding. I did all the stuff that the father in the wedding usually does because I was the only one really for it. My uncle was my stepdad's best man, and my other uncle couldn't make it. As for a more fun wedding, when my uncle got married, I was 20, and he got married at a relative's house that had a very large property. They set up a beautiful outdoor wedding there. They also set up a great alcohol tent, and the closest people, including me to the newlyweds, spent the entire night drinking and partying. We ate breakfast before we went to bed. It was amazing. I don't remember anything after the ceremony. Story 34. Musicians here play frequently at weddings. This was by far my worst one ever. Not now of speak now, but still impressive. Groom books my string quartet for the entire day. Ceremony, drinks, meal. All seems to go well. Though you can tell the groom's family is much more well off than the bride's, and she seemed to be a bit of an attention whore. But either way, ceremony and drinks went without a hitch. Everyone seemed very happy. Fast forward to the meal. We played through the whole thing, and as we were packing up, they started speeches. Usually we'd have left by this point, but our stuff was in a little side room off the banquet room, separated only by salon-style swing doors, and we had no way of getting out unless we walked awkwardly between the guests' tables. So we decided to stay put until the speeches were over and listen in. Best man's and fob's speeches went well, and then it was left to the groom. He thanked everyone for coming and then said that for his speech he needed everyone to open the envelopes that had been placed on the tables. We'd noticed these on the way in but hadn't thought anything of it. There was an exciting bustle as people appointed someone at each table to open the envelopes, followed shortly by a very quick change in the atmosphere. Someone gasped and another person audibly said, "What the hell is this?" Amongst the general confusion, the groom gets back on the microphone and says, "Yes, I'm sorry to say that what you see in these pictures has been going on for about 2 months. I will be annulling the marriage. Thank you all for coming." Turns out the bride had been having an affair with the best man, and the groom had found out and hired a private investigator to photograph them at it. He'd printed the pictures and put them in the envelopes. Of course, chaos ensued. The groom dropped mic and bailed immediately. The bride's mother threw red wine all over her dress and kept screaming that she was a whore, along with an awful lot of things alluding to the fact that she'd never find another good, rich man again. The groom's 2 brothers beat up the best man badly. There was a lot of screaming and glass throwing. The bride was crying uncontrollably and everyone left as if it was so awkward. We just hid in our little side room until everyone had gone and then emerged, slightly shell-shocked, to inspect the pictures. There could be no doubt as to what was happening in them. The groom emailed us a few days later and apologized to us as he realized we'd got stuck. He explained that he'd only found out a fortnight before the wedding, and having paid for everything with little chance of refunds, he just decided to go ahead with it and out her so that she couldn't twist the story to her family after the fact. How he made it through the entire wedding, I will never know, but it certainly made for an interesting day at work. Story 35. Bride's enemy in the back said she loved groom and wishes he'd marry her and not the slut. Bride's father gets up and yells at enemy and asks who invited her. Then enemy's father gets up and yells that groom invites them. Then bride starts arguing with groom. Then everyone starts arguing with everyone. Meanwhile, I went to the cafeteria area and saw other people sitting at tables by themselves. I sat down at a table and started eating cake when a crowd of people walked in still arguing. Then I walked over to lonely person at table to introduce myself, and the 2 other lonely people came to same table. We ate lots of cake and talked. Story 36. This is a myth created by Hollywood. The actual line, when included in wedding ceremonies, goes like this: "If any person has a lawful reason this couple should not be joined, may they step forward now or forever hold their peace." That means they aren't brother and sister or first cousins or one is wanted by the law. That kind of thing. You can't just object because you aren't happy with a person's choice. Story 37. I was at a friend's wedding. Her family, very religious, and his not at all. One of her cousins stood up and said that she knew they had been living in sin and engaging in premarital intercourse. After that, several of her family members left the venue and others stayed but turned their backs on the couple being married. It was a very strange reception as some of those that stayed but turned their backs showed up. The marriage failed after a short time and an accusation of a pregnancy not being the husband's child. Very strange people in the end, considering that while we were all friends for a time, it all seemed good, but since then, while we still know them and see them around, it has become like a contest in which one can sleep with most people from their past histories. Story 38. I'm a pastor and I typically don't include that part because it's a little bit antiquated. I performed my brother's wedding a few years ago. They had it at this beautiful farm, one of those trendy rustic event venues, and because I wanted to troll him a little, I planned to ask if anyone had an objection to the union, and then just wait an uncomfortably long time with a great punchline where I would lean over to his bride and say, "Sorry, I really tried. You can have your 20 pounds back," to make it seem like she asked me to create an opportunity where she didn't have to marry him. As a big brother, it seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime. But what happened was way better. After I asked for an objection, and everything was quiet, some random sheep in the field behind us let out the biggest bleat I've ever heard. The comedic timing was perfect. It was hilarious and everyone completely lost it. It was the day I learned that sheep are funnier than me. Story 39. In the UK, it is a legal objection, so matters of affairs, sexuality, or simply because the objector is drunk is insufficient. But if an allegation is made, I am required to stop the wedding and investigate. Only legal objections are legitimate. Legal reasons might be that the banns were improperly called, i.e., one of the parties is not a UK national and a special license was required, or that one of the parties is already married. I tell couples that if an objector makes an objection, then a bond of £1,000 is due, which is forfeit if it is a spurious objection. As I say, we've all seen 4 weddings and a funeral, and no joke is worth £1,000, is it? It has never happened on my watch. First Simon, story 40. At my cousin's wedding about 15 years ago, her fiancé's mom was really drunk and got up at that point at the wedding and began a rant on how much she hates my cousin and how her son deserved better, and started swearing at her. People tried to stop the mom and take her away. It was super embarrassing, but her son told them to stop and let her finish. He said she should be allowed to say how she feels, but whatever she had to say didn't matter because he loved my cousin and was going to marry her, no matter what. Not sure what the relationship with that mother is like now. Not that close with them, but they are still married and have a cute kid, so they were good for each other. Story 41. My friends, who we'll call Brad and Janet, were getting married. This was a couple of years ago. Brad is bisexual. Brad's friends and family, including Janet, are all aware of this. Janet's family doesn't know as they are rather conservative and probably would have made a scene. Brad's best man is his ex, Frank. Brad and Frank were together for almost 7 years and broke up because Brad wanted to get married and have kids. Frank didn't. They decided compromising would end up with one of them being miserable/resenting the other person. Breakup was amicable, but both were devastated. However, they remained friends. Brad met Janet only 2 weeks after breaking up with Frank and proposed less than 6 months later. At the time of the wedding, they'd known each other for less than a year, but they seemed happy, so no one thought anything of it. The ceremony goes off without a hitch. Janet's maid of honor gives a lovely toast that had quite a few people tearing up. Frank gives his best man speech right after. Now I found out after the wedding that Brad had asked Frank not to mention anything in his speech about their previous involvement, specifically because Janet's family did not know about his sexuality. Frank had agreed. However, Frank was a little tipsy when he gave his speech. I knew things were about to go off the rails when Frank said, "I can't do this." He goes on to say that breaking up with Brad was the biggest regret he had, that he still loved him, and he knew that Brad still loved him too because he'd told him so. Frank gets escorted out of the reception. The rest of the night is very awkward. Brad and Janet go on their honeymoon, but from what I was told, they spent the entire time fighting. The fighting continued after they got home. During a particularly nasty spat, Brad reveals that he hooked up with Frank during his bachelor's party, and that yes, he still had feelings for him. They gave it the old college try, but Janet left Brad like 9 months after they got married. Janet is remarried to a great guy and is pregnant with her first child. I will be attending Brad and Frank's wedding in May. Story 42. I've posted this before and my family found me, but whatever, it's my cake day. True story. My father has been married 5 times, and at the last wedding it happens twice. July 7th, 2007, the family and friends began to gather. All of us taking turns trying to talk him out of marrying the woman he had only met a few months before, but his mind was set. Since the date was so popular and arrangements were made so late, the minister was a used car salesman with a certificate from an online site. The wedding and reception were held in my father's backyard that happened to be right next door to his best friend, which proves to be that day I was resigned to my fate of best man that day, my first and only time with that honor. When the ceremony began, my father began with a speech explaining how 2 people could meet and fall in love in such a short time, and that he knew it was hard to believe. And that's when his best friend, just in time from his fishing trip, raised his Tanqueray and tonic to ask, "Is this the part where we object? 'Cause I'd like to." In all my life, I've never witnessed the mix of relief/shock/humor, horror, and all the other emotions this stirred. My sister cried, his friends laughed, her family cringed, but my sweet grandmother was so stoic I'll never forget. My father calmly said, "No, bud, not yet," and went on. He began to talk about other relationships and people and how he knew this marriage would last. And that's when our hero spoke again. "How about now? I really need to object to this." The same sentiment was felt throughout, and yet my father replied, "No, bud, we're not doing that," and then turned to the minister and said, "We should probably skip that part." The ceremony went on, and so did the marriage. For about 6 months, my dad's best friend objected to his wedding and my dad wished he had listened. Story 43. I was the best man at a wedding of a Jewish friend of mine and his Greek Orthodox Catholic bride. It was at the bride's home and her father insisted that a religious person perform the vows. As a compromise, the groom found a Unitarian minister who agreed to do the ceremony and promised not to say anything religious for a $50 fee. The minister said, "Do you take the bride for your wife?" To which the groom said, "I do." "And do you take the groom for your husband?" To which the bride said, "I do." The preacher said, "I now pronounce you man and wife." To which the father of the groom yelled out, "Is that all I get for $50? The marriage ended shortly thereafter. Story 44. At my sister's wedding, all was going great. Only close friends and family are in attendance, and amongst them are a gaggle of children. The registrar has got through all her lines. The children have all behaved beautifully, and we have just finished if anyone has any lawful objections. Then an almighty squawk rings around the chapel, my 2-year-old niece being the proud reason. The registrar was quiet for a moment and then said, "I think we can ignore that one. My niece is 6 now and still has perfect comedic timing." Story 45. This is a good excuse to tell one of my favorite stories. About 2 years ago, I attended a wedding in Nice, France. It was my older cousin getting married to his girlfriend. She, the fiancée, was French and so is my cousin's dad. However, my auntie is from Scotland. So my cousin James, the groom, is half French, half Scottish. Anyway, an argument ensued before the wedding as my family wanted the wedding to be in Scotland and my cousin's dad and future wife wanted it to be in France. They settled in France, and to say the very least, my family were not happy. Me and my mum were happy for the excuse to go to France, but my extended family were fuming. They just could not get over it. Anyway, we got to France 2 days before the wedding. On the day we went to a beautiful converted barn in Nice and waited as the barn filled up with family and friends. My extended family weren't there, and my cousin's dad was fuming that they'd refused to come due to it not being in Scotland. My cousin stood nervously awaiting his future wife. She came out and all went smoothly. They began the vows, and when it came the time to object, almost in impeccable timing, the door to the barn burst open and in came 15 to 20 of my extended family, dressed in kilts and 3 of them brandishing bagpipes. They stormed down the aisle playing the bagpipes, badly and singing the Scottish anthem and football chants. Everyone in the barn turned horrified to see them storming around and singing. The bride laughed hysterically, but my cousin didn't look happy. Then, my great-uncle took to the stage and said, "Ah wee James, I was gang to scalp your wee behind, but we decided it best he'd join the festivities. Congratulations from us all. The Scottish lot are ending tune and we're here for the free bar and some frog's legs aye." People erupted with laughter, and even the French side of my family had a giggle. The wedding continued as normal, and the beautiful, elegant reception was overrun with kilt-wearing clowns singing and dancing at every opportunity. It was a grand night and one I'll never forget. Story 46. Apparently, I happened. The groom objected. So did my wife. Introducing them to each other in high school. Best friends to both. So much so that they threatened to put me in a half-tux, half-bridesmaid outfit. All of this to say that at the vows, standing beside the groom and minding my own business, I hear the preacher say, "Do you take Tailgunner to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Me, wait, what? Groom, no, she does not, cause my name is John. As it turns out, the preacher had officiated another wedding the day before. The previous groom had my first name. Preacher had forgotten to cross the old name out and write John's name instead. Story 47. I am a priest. Here's a mildly interesting tidbit about this. In a church context, this question is a holdover from the days when the civil authorities had little to do with weddings, and it was simply administered solely by the church. Therefore, it was the church's responsibility to ensure that nothing was amiss, most notably issues of adultery or of consanguinity, being too closely related by blood. Now that couples must receive their marriage license from the state before being married in the church, this question is essentially moot, as the state has already determined that barring some sort of identity theft, there are no impediments to their being married. We still ask because there may be reasons, such as adultery, that require investigation. If someone does object during a church service, it is protocol to take them and the couple into the vestry and determine what the source of the objection is. If it was a joke, they are jerks for interrupting and we carry on. If it is real, like a groomsman sleeping with the bride the night before her wedding, then stuff hits the fan. Story 48. I was technically there, but as a fetus. It was my parents' wedding, and nearly everyone there objected. A little backstory. I'm an Orthodox Jew. The wedding we care about and make the party for is the religious ceremony, after which couples will go to the courthouse at some future date and get married for legal purposes. So, like 6 months after my parents get religiously married, they go to the courthouse. My dad used to work there, so he invited all his coworkers. They knew he didn't really care about the ceremony, so when the clerk or whoever asked for objections, the room went wild. The clerk was confused. He got even more confused when he said, "You may now kiss the bride." And my dad went, "Nah." And my mom said sarcastically, "Ew," because Orthodox Jews don't really do PDA. Story 49. I went to a good friend's wedding in Vegas with another group of friends. She was like 5 months pregnant, and the guy she was about to marry had just gotten out of prison after serving 5 years for shooting someone. When I first met him, he had an ankle bracelet on, and I felt she was lowering her standards. Anyways, she was happy, so who am I to judge? The other friends who were in attendance and I decided to go out and drink before the wedding because she was busy hanging out with her fiancé. Well, we got too drunk, and by the time we were at the wedding and the officiant asked if anyone objected, I stood up and objected. I said that I felt she should not get married because I didn't think he would be able to provide, etc. Something to that effect before I was yanked down back to my seat. She laughed. Fast forward 7 months and he was in prison again, facing 25 to life for commercial robberies. She and I are still friends, and she is now divorced and remarried to a great guy. Story 50. At my brother's wedding, where he married his kick-ass husband, important, once that line was spoken, my brand new brother-in-law's mother gets up to start screeching about how this whole wedding was sinful and they were terrible for being gay and she couldn't allow it, only she said it in a much, much worse way. Luckily for her, brother-in-law's awesome grandma, who raised him alone, marches over and smacks the stars out of her daughter before I can move, and then grabs her by the ear and starts berating her and dragging her out the side door, telling her that she's a horrible woman for trying to ruin her son's wedding. Booted her right out, and the officiant, my other brother, made a joke and just continued going as if what happened was of no consequence. The rest of the wedding went off without a hitch, and now we look back and laugh at how she really thought that would work and how we never want to get in the way of that tiny little woman. Story 51. Oh man, one of the most awkward moments I've ever lived through. I was running the soundboard for the wedding of some good friends. My position will become relevant in a moment. The bride's parents were not in favor of the match. They were well off and felt that their Ivy League-educated daughter was too good for the groom, who grew up on the streets in Miami. Sadly, they were missing out on the fact that he is one of the most genuine and admirable people on this planet, and you couldn't ask for a man of better character to be marrying your daughter. The bride and groom respectfully tried to win them over for quite some time, but once they got engaged, the parents made their level of disapproval known by refusing to contribute financially to the wedding. The wedding date draws near, and despite various tactics from the parents, including the mother of the bride getting the father to agree not to walk his baby girl down the aisle, it becomes clear that the bride and groom are truly committed to each other and absolutely will not call it off. The parents seem to resign to the outcome and decide to attend the wedding. Yay! Unfortunately, day of, it turns out that the mother of the bride is a total narcissist and couldn't just let it go. Here's where my helping the sound system intersects with the drama. The ceremony begins. Everything is going as rehearsed. I am fading and transitioning everybody's respective music with perfection, focusing hard to keep everything smooth, lest it distract me from the wedding itself. Then it is time for the bride's entrance. I get the thumbs up from the wedding coordinator and fade up on a beautiful piano and cello track. The minister asks everyone to rise, and we all look at the doors in eager expectation. They should open after a few measures of the music, but they don't. Music keeps playing, still nothing. The bride's music was the only one that was clipped prior to me receiving it, and it is only about 40 seconds long. So we reach the end of the track with still no bride. The coordinator and I decided to play it one more time. Same results, just more awkward. Now the room is silent, confused looks being passed around. Then we hear it. The mother of the bride had sneaked out into the hall to make her objections known to her daughter, one last time, face to face, just as she should have been walking down the aisle. She is hissing her whispered arguments right behind the closed doors. About 2 minutes later, mother of the bride re-enters the sanctuary and takes her seat next to her husband, seeming unaware of how unbelievably tense the room is with awkwardness, thanks to her. The coordinator talks to the bride, and another minute later, we're ready to make her entrance for real. Cue the music. The doors open, the beautiful bride enters. You can tell from her face that she is feeling a lot, as you can imagine, but is still overjoyed to see her groom at the altar. She is determined to marry him. We all exhale, but then the drama continues. She makes it halfway down the aisle and her father stands up. He couldn't take it anymore and decided there was no way he was going to let his daughter walk down the aisle alone. He makes his way through his row and joins her to walk her the rest of the way. It is an amazing moment, until narcissist mother of the bride strikes again. She quickly follows him and joins them in the aisle. We all hear mother of the bride loudly whisper, "I told you not to do this," to her husband. The music runs out again. They ended up staying there in a huddle, holding each other and crying. For several minutes, mother of the bride sits down, and the father and bride finish her journey to the altar, together. The minister wisely omits asking the audience for objections. The rest of the ceremony goes on uninterrupted. At the reception dinner, mother of the bride tries to save face during her toast, fails miserably. All the guests shower the bride and groom with new heights of love and support, and they go off into their new life together more committed than ever, thanks to her parents' determination to keep them apart. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.